Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And listen, one of the unfortunate truths about North Dakota is that we have a really high suicide rate. And we could probably spend a whole show talking about what that is. Maybe part of it is the fact that so much of our state's economy is tied up in commodity-based businesses. And we all know prices go up, prices go down. Those can be difficult to navigate. We also have a lot of very rural communities where, especially during some long, hard, dark winters, can feel isolating. So suffice it to say that investing in resources to help people who are struggling is a good idea for our state. And to that end, we wanted to bring on to this show, my first show back from vacation, by the way, which was lovely. I hope you all didn't miss us too much. But we wanted to bring on Jennifer Illich. She is with FirstLink, which, Jennifer, first of all, welcome to the program. And second of all, describe what FirstLink is exactly. It's a very important program, and we have some numbers we're going to go through here where it's clearly you folks are doing a lot of good work, but I don't know that the average North Dakotan is all that aware of what FirstLink is and what it does. So run us through that.
Great, Rob. First, thanks so much for inviting me to your show. I'm honored to be here today, to be able to talk, and that's a great first question. Thank you. FirstLink is a nonprofit agency. We've been around for 52 years, but that being said, you are right. There are still a lot of people that have never heard of FirstLink or they're not sure what we do. So I love opportunities like this to be able to do outreach. So FirstLink answers phone lines. So we do tons of phone support. So we answer the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So that phone line is just what it says, in the name. People call 24/7 for free confidential support, sometimes related to thoughts of suicide, anxiety, hallucinations. It can be related to substance use, trying to recover and stay sober, and they just need somebody to reach out to talk to. Sometimes people call that phone line because they are worried about somebody else and they're not sure what to do. So they can call us and we can help with the screening process with their friends and family. And then our other major phone line is the 211 information and referral phone line. So again, 24/7, free and confidential. The 211, and really we could do it on both lines, but we have a community directory of resources. So North Dakota is full of great resources, tons of nonprofits, government agencies, for-profit behavioral health agencies. We take all of those great places and put them all together into one directory.
So really, I mean, the 211, and I guess my question I'm going to ask is why two phone numbers? But 988 is, I'm having a crisis. I'm struggling. I have an addiction or something. I need some help, and it's an emergent situation. 211 is more, I have a problem and I want to understand what sort of resources might be available to help me solve that problem. But why the two phone numbers?
Correct. So the two phone numbers have two national accreditation bodies throughout. North Dakota is we're 40% of the centers throughout the United States that are blended. So we answer both the 988 and the 211. Some states like Minnesota are separate. So you either call 988 to get crisis or you call 211 to get financial support. We love that we are blended in North Dakota. It works so well because if somebody's thinking of suicide, they probably need help with rent and diapers. It's financial need often comes with thoughts of suicide or behavioral health crisis. So our call specialists are trying to answer both phone lines so we can provide our services on, really under each phone number. So really there's no wrong phone number to call, 988 or 211. You'll get the same people and you'll get the same service in North Dakota.
And Jennifer, that's an interesting point because you brought up Minnesota and North Dakota. Can you kind of discuss for folks where all you service as an organization? You're based out of Fargo, but can you kind of get into the geography and how that fits into the national health crisis hotlines?
Yeah, yep, that's great. So FirstLink answers the phone lines for all of North Dakota. And then for the 988 side, we answer for 17 counties in Minnesota.
And and all of North Dakota.
And all of North Dakota, yeah.
And those are the 17 northwestern counties.
That's correct. We kind of look at FirstLink like as a hub of information and a connector to other nonprofits and like behavioral health supports.
Now, the 211 and 988 numbers, those are national numbers though, right? Like most of our downloads are North Dakota or Minnesota, but we do have some from other parts. So if somebody's listening to this and like, well, gee, I'm in Virginia. If I dial 988, am I going to get help? Those are national numbers, right? If you're in Virginia, it might not be your specific organization that answers, but someone will answer.
That is correct. They're national numbers. And I think that is so important to know because if you move away from North Dakota, if you move away from Minnesota, you can always dial 211, you can always dial 988 and get high quality service no matter where you are in the United States.
And then Jennifer, what trends are you seeing in particular with 988 as pertains to both North Dakota and the Western Minnesota constituents, residents that you serve?
Sure. So one trend is, a year ago, so July 16th of last year, they had a big change with the 988 phone number. It used to be 1-800-273-8255 to call.
Rolls right off the tongue.
And that's right. It's long, right? You're in a crisis and you have to dial that huge, long phone number. It was 3 years in the making. The federal government decided we need to do a easy to remember 988 phone number. We need to have consistency throughout the United States, and we need to market this for all behavioral health and not related to suicide. So last July of 16th of 2022, it changed to the 988 number. Since then, one thing we've seen is a huge increase in our call volume. I think just the easy to know phone number. There's tons of marketing going on both nationally and locally in our North Dakota side and our Minnesota side. A lot of our trends on the phone are related to COVID. Still, COVID was difficult, and during COVID we had a heightened need to survive, and now people are kind of relaxed and they have time to process. So people they're calling, to kind of process what they went through during COVID, like loss of loved ones without getting to say goodbye. Some people still have financial burden related to COVID, so that of course brings a lot of stress to us. Another trend is a lot of youth have been calling, increase in youth in the last year and a half. Just a lot of thoughts of suicide with our 18 and below in both the North Dakota and Minnesota side. And I'm glad that they're reaching out for help.
That is good. I just wanted to mention real quick, and I'll kick it to you then, Rob. Some of the information you provided to Rob and I before the show started, that was very helpful, and thank you for providing that. An obvious standout stat to me for context is you had over 19,000 contacts relating to suicide last year, and that is a lot given the population of around 1 million people. Right. Yep. We have about 3/4, a little less in North Dakota. You throw in Western Minnesota, you're getting close to the million, maybe 900,000 range. And you saw a 21% increase from the previous year to 2022. It's not a fair question to you really at all, but since you are on the front lines dealing with this, do you see particular reasons or trends in this? Or maybe it's the case that this was always present and that they're through the 988 number able to reach more resources. Without leading you further, what are you seeing? What do you see as causes that increase? And
you're right, those numbers, the increase in calls have been just so great. Like 10 years ago, we had 1,500 calls related to suicide. And like you said, Ben, last year we had over 19,000 calls related to suicide. So 10 years.
4 to 5 digits. Sorry to interrupt again, but.
Yeah, no interrupt. So just a lot of people calling to reach out for help. So we talk about that a lot internally and with state partners and other stakeholders, like why is everybody calling? Why is such an increase? And I think it's a combination of all the things that you said. I think There's such a stigma of behavioral health still, but it's getting better. People are able to talk more openly about anxiety, depression, about their thoughts of suicide. And some people are realizing now that some people have thoughts of suicide their whole life, but they don't act on it. And the best thing to do is to talk openly and directly about it, to make it part of our common life so we can learn the coping skills that we need to keep ourselves safe. Same with anxiety, same with depression. So people want to call now and reach out for help. So, and I think the marketing too for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is much needed federally and locally. Our North Dakota Department of Health and Human Services decided to write, and they received a great SAMHSA grant to do 988 education and outreach in North Dakota. And that grant
let folks know what a SAMHSA grant is? So I interrupt you, but folks don't always know.
SAMHSA is a really big accreditation body. They do a lot of great work in the life of mental health. They stand for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. It's a nationwide agency. So the North Dakota Department of Health and Human Services wrote a grant. They have like radio advertisements to call 988, some TV. In Fargo, they have a bright pink bus wrap that says call 988 that's driving right around on the streets of Fargo. They have some billboards in Dickinson. So I think more and more people just know that they're not alone, that they can call 24/7 and talk to somebody right in North Dakota to get the resources that they need.
I think it's worth stressing that 988. Okay, let me start here. The big increase is some of it because you mentioned that you got an easier phone number to call.
Yep.
Do you think some of that's related to the number? And by the way, I'm glad that people are calling. I'm not trying to, or I'm not trying to suggest that there's. I'm just saying, is part of the increase just that the number is easier?
I think so, yeah. And people mention that the number is easier to call. Now they have it. Before we would tell people like, put it in your phone because you're not going to memorize this number. So you're going to have to go into your contact information in your phone. So I think that's part of it. Google did a lot of great things and like Android, iPhones. So if you like search topics related to suicide or ask Siri, if you tell Siri like I'm really lonely and depressed today, Siri will say, do you want to call 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline? If you don't hit no on your phone, it's going to call 988 automatically. So iPhone put that in place. Android, Google Search has, and other search engines all work together with the executive director of Vibrant, John Draper, to put some really great safety nets for people out there that'll direct them to 988.
Another statistic that you shared is that less than 0.1% of your suicide-related contacts required rescue efforts. And I think that's really important. It illustrates, I think, two things. First of all, just because you call this number doesn't mean you're going to get a bunch of people rushing into your life. Because I think that could be a deterrent, people not wanting to call. You know, they're at a critical moment. Maybe they just need somebody to listen to them for a little bit. That can be all this is. If you need additional help, you're going to get it. But that can be all this is, too. I think that's really important for people who are feeling anxious about even making this call. It doesn't have to mean that a bunch of people are going to show up in your life. But the other thing is that just 0.1%, it shows how at that critical inflection point in someone's life, how just talking to somebody can make the difference.
And that's exactly right. I'm glad that you brought that up because that is a big concern with people. If they say the word suicide, they sometimes had experiences or they assume that the police are going to come and they're going to take them into somewhere and they're going to have to go to inpatient therapy for 2 weeks. And that's not usually the case. Usually they can make a secure safety plan and stay in the comforts of their home and be able to work to keep themselves safe. We work with human crisis centers, like human service centers throughout North Dakota. So our state has 8 major human service centers. They all have open access walk-in clinics for behavioral health. So Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, people can walk right in for behavioral health. So on the phones, we screen that and we invite people to go there and get the help they need. Also, after hours, they have mobile crisis. So we are able to screen and deploy a therapist right out to their home, most of the time no cost to the person because the state is going to help pay for that and kind of start their recovery of behavioral health. So we can get a mobile therapist right out there to their home to help them right where they're at instead of have the law enforcement go out.
And I want to stress too, I think it's really important to remember this isn't just suicide. This can be listen, I can't get out of my bed. Like I'm supposed to go to work, or the baby's crying and I can't get myself going. Or I'm really angry at my partner and I don't understand why I'm flying off the handle. I can't get this under control. It could be those things too.
That's exactly right. Yep, listening and support. Life can throw a lot at us, and sometimes we just need that person to talk to. And sometimes we don't want to talk to our spouse or our partners again. Sometimes we don't want to call our friends at 2 a.m. You can dial 211-988. We'll be there for you. We can help work through some of these things that are on your mind.
And it's worth noting, too, in the stats that you gave us that you received 85,000 contacts last year. And then I assume that number must be 85 minus the 21,000 to the 211 number, or to the 988 number, to the 211 resource line that helps people who are in trouble with things like housing, things like financial worry, trying to hook them up with temporary employers, temp jobs, temporary housing if they're experiencing homelessness that isn't a crisis that week, aka it's a youth who got kicked out of a parent's home for whatever reason. They're couch surfing for this week, but they're trying to figure out a solution that's going to work for them long term, that sort of thing.
Yep, that's right. So over 85,000 contacts last year. And contacts we consider incoming calls, outgoing calls, text, and chats. And so you're right. Yeah, just helping a variety of people wherever they need. So it might be link into financial need like rent help.
I do want to get on the legislative side of this and how the state of North Dakota, I think, stepped up in a very significant way here this last legislative session, how all this works. But part of nothing happens for free and nothing just appears. In order to do all these things, you have to have people on these phone lines, a team ready, people trained. I wanted to ask you, Jennifer, and I know there's some confidentiality you can't disclose, and when I ask you to get past that, but how is it, you run this line, you operate this team. What kind of, personnel does it take to do this? What kind of staff do you hire? It takes I assume, very specific kind of person to be able to operate these lines, handle these situations. Can you get into a little bit of that behind the scenes as to how this is done for our listeners?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a really diverse staff at FirstLink, just people from all different walks of life. They work here because their hearts are into it. They have a lot of empathy for people out in the community, and they really just truly want to make a difference in the lives of others. Our funding source is pretty diverse. We get funding from the North Dakota, state of North Dakota, but some contracts. We do some fundraisers. We're always trying to make ends meet. But the North Dakota legislative session was very generous to FirstLink last year. We got our name out there. We made a lot of new connections. We had a lot of people behind us, like Ben gave us a lot of great advice and kind of where to start and how to maneuver the political process. I was pretty new with politics. I watched it a little bit. I maybe submitted a couple letters of support here and there, but this year I really jumped in with both feet to try to make sure that we got the funding that we needed.
Well, you succeeded because you went from, I think, 100,000 to 1.86 million, which is a big jump from a pretty conservative legislature. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben.
Just Jennifer, can you kind of speak to, you were servicing on the 988 side especially, you were servicing 2 states. Can you kind of get into where the funding was before and what kind of budget you'd have in order to run this? Because that's kind of why I wanted to get into the team and the fact that, nothing's free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And that in addition to, FTEs, full-time employees, you have to, there has to be the technology to respond to this 24/7. There has to be the kind of training and, benefits that allow people to work jobs like these that I don't want to use this label, but these could be burnout jobs very quickly, like an EMT, like anybody who works emergency rooms, like anywhere else.
And you're right, we did have a high staff turnover. So one thing we came to the legislator with is very specific needs for this huge increase in our funding needs. And one was the salary. We had to have enough funding to be able to pay professional salary wages. We were paying our staff $9 an hour, and they would come in for a few months and then leave to work at McDonald's or Kohl's, Walmart, because everywhere pays more than $9 an hour. But this
just real quick, a shift manager at Qdoba right now can make $18 an hour starting. So you can get double to make a burrito, or you could take a call about someone who's thinking about ending their life. And I don't mean to be so crass about it, but
yeah, then saving your neighbor's life on the phone. And, we needed to pay our staff. And the legislative, they listened to that and they realized that and they respected that. So one thing we needed that extra funding is to get our staff at professional wages. I was using 911 wages, and we're still not quite high as 911 for our salaries, but we do a lot of the similar job tasks in a different way. Another thing, you're right, our technology is just growing and growing, and always new criteria that we have to add to our technology. So we can't have our phones or computers or internet go down. So we have to have a lot of redundancy in our technology. And that bill, of course, is getting higher and higher every year to keep us up and going and operating. We have great vendors, great partners in the IT world to help keep our phone lines going.
We have one of the numbers here. I mean, because we talk, and I also don't want to sound crass, but the reality is that money's money, and this stuff isn't free. And our lawmakers are tasked with doing cost-benefit analysis. They have to weigh the benefits against the cost, because we don't have an unlimited amount of money. But your organization, you did, although we talked about if you call, they're not necessarily just going to send people to your door because you called. That actually happens in a very small percentage, but sometimes you do. And you call these rescues, and there were 128. So if people want to talk about that impact of going from 100,000 to 1.8 whatever million, you're talking about 128 potential lives saved.
Yeah.
I don't know, that I read that, and that was profound for me. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal.
Yep. And we only call 911 if they're high lethality for suicides. They have a plan, they have means in their hand, and they say, I'm not going to be alive tomorrow. So it is truly saving lives when we call 911, working with our 911 partners, our law enforcement partners, to get in there and help them as fast as they can. And you're right, no money, no mission. We need to be able to pay our staff and our rents and our technology fees. So we do need that funding behind us in order to do a good job. Some of the legislative staff asked me, what if you don't get this funding? And I said, well, we'll still operate, we'll still go. But instead of our hold time being 24 seconds to average last year, which still can be a long time, if you're having thoughts of suicide, but instead of 24 seconds to hold time, the national average is like a minute and a half. Some call centers, they're on hold for 18 minutes before their phone is answered. So when the legislators ask me what happens if you don't get this funding, the hold times are going to go up. We're not going to have as many staff on the phone, and so we're not going to be able to meet the needs of North Dakota. So we're just so grateful that they heard us and that they reflected that in funding.
And by the way, the 85,681 contacts that you had in 2022, and that's not just, we should note, you can text these numbers too. Like you can
text.
Some people don't. I'm one of those people, don't necessarily like calling. Yep. If I can text, I'll text, or if I can email, I'll email. But so contacts includes them all, but that's an average of over a 365-day year. That's an average of 234 a day. That's remarkable. Sorry, Ben, you were going to say something.
No, not at all. Jennifer, you had disclosed to me previously the reason I wanted to get into this and talk about what the North Dakota legislature did was because you are servicing two states, as frequently happens with entities that are along the North Dakota's eastern border, Minnesota's western border. Yep. Your funding formula is much more heavily tilted towards Minnesota funding previously, despite serving a majority, I think, what was it, population-wise, 3/4 majority. North Dakota audience isn't the right word, but residents, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's correct. So we're serving the Minnesota side. They had trouble with the Suicide Lifeline. They lost their funding for the 98 Suicide Lifeline. So for about 3 years, if you call the National Suicide Lifeline, the calls went to a backup center. So they were answered by somebody in New York. Now the state of Minnesota is very supportive. So when they were getting their phone lines up again, they put it out as like a contract, and they're like, who can answer our phone lines? And so we bid for that, and the state came and asked FirstLink, will you help us out? Because now they have all new centers, and they have to make new policies, procedures, best practices to help the state of Minnesota community, have the best service possible. So on the Minnesota side, we're one of 4 that answer for the Minnesota Lifeline, but we do get funding from the Minnesota government that pays for the Minnesota side of the phone lines. So we do keep our budget really separate to make sure that we reflect which state we're getting paid from.
We have a few minutes left. Obviously, there's a big victory here in North Dakota, a lot of funding, but as you mentioned, technology is always changing. The way people communicate is always changing. What's for the future? I mean, what sort of initiatives are you looking at to be present, to be there? Like, the safety net, I guess, that people. What's the future look like for your organization?
Yeah, so one thing we're starting to do slowly, and we're going to work with the Fargo area first and then roll it out throughout the state of North Dakota, is to team up with 911 dispatch at a higher level. So right now, if 911 gets a call related to suicide or behavioral health, a lot of times they send law enforcement because that's what they're trying to do. And right now it's best practice to send police. But as you can see, 19,000 calls that we took related to suicide, 128 times we only had to send law enforcement. So we're going to team up with 911. They're going to screen their calls and then send their behavioral health calls or suicide related calls to FirstLink. So we can hopefully reduce the number of times of police response. Switch that over to therapists responding or support over the phone. So that's going to be big.
Wow, that's a really big deal because,
Yep.
Not only is it, as much as I love our police officers, that's not always the right solution. Maybe it's
Yep.
not even usually the right, based on your numbers, it's not even usually the right decision to send them into that
if you support
situation.
police officers, you should be allowing them to narrow down their focus on what is already a very busy job.
That was the other
Yeah.
point I was going to make. Cops have a lot
Yeah.
of other things to do. If they can
Yeah.
offload some of these calls and maybe they don't have to go out at all, that frees up cops to do a lot of other things. And again, the numbers that you're talking about, you handled 19,471 suicide calls, just yours. I don't
Yep.
know how many the 911 operators handled, but if they're
Yep.
sending cops out on almost all of them,
Yep.
that seems like that's going to be a big savings for law enforcement.
Yep. Yep. And a lot of third-party calls. So I call, I'm worried about my supervisor, maybe that's thinking of suicide. 911 is going to send a policeman out there to check on the supervisor. We can call that supervisor and say, hey, my name is Jennifer. I work with 988. Let me screen you for suicide. How's it going today? So we can do more phone support in a different way.
Jennifer, did you find when you were working with the legislature, you said this was your first time really jumping in, getting out there, and that's a story that I want more people to hear, because frequently, here's a weird link that I'm trying to make, but follow me down this rabbit hole. When folks who don't work in emergency services maybe haven't had that as part of their lives, they don't really know what that world's like. They don't know what the behind the scenes is like. And for people who worked in the private sector their whole life or just haven't worked for state government, don't live in Bismarck, they don't really know what their state government is like. Doesn't mean they're against it. It's just they don't know what the operation is like. One, how did you find working with legislators for the first time with some of your opposition? But two, it's a kind of a two-part question. Did you find that legislators were they previously aware of the rate of contacts you were getting, of what this emergency service center was, or that they knew what was happening with the state? Was this something that was kind of new to them? Did you have to 101 with them, or was it more about the advanced, how's the funding, what's the funding level at conversation with them?
Yeah, great question. So one thing, being newer to the political scene, I found it really friendly. I could reach out. It's really easy to get a lobbyist number in North Dakota. It's easy to be able to speak during committees or submit legislative testimony for issues that we need. So if you're not part of the legislative scene, like I was not, get involved. It's all online. It's super easy. I think everybody should be more aware, and they should jump in and just be more aware of the issues that North Dakota's had. And it's so easy to make your voice known in our state. Our legislatives, a handful of legislators knew what FirstLink was. They're behind us, kind of the behavioral health committee that we've testified with several times. But that's one of the things that was a challenge for me that I learned quickly, is when I testified, I'd go in there assuming people knew what FirstLink was in the amount of call volume. And I'd go, we need funding. And they say, who are you? What's FirstLink? We've never heard of you. So I had to just take a step back and kind of explain from ground up of who we are, how many calls we're helping, what we're doing on our phone lines, that it's truly free. It's truly 24/7. Not a lot of profits are truly 24/7 with somebody answering the phone.
Well, I can be an anecdote for that. I don't know that there are many people in North Dakota who are as immersed in politics and public policy as I am. And I just learned a heck of a lot about FirstLink from your email and from this interview. So again, there's a lot of North Dakotans out there who I think maybe don't know that these resources are available. And again, it's not just, oh, I'm having an emergent situation and I'm going to commit suicide. It's not just suicide. It's I can't get my emotions under control. I can't get out of bed. I'm struggling, and I just need someone to help me get the ball rolling, or just talk me down, or something. Or it can be, listen, I can't pay my bills this month, and I don't know what to do. It can be that too. I mean, these resources are available. And listen, there's no magic bullet that's going to solve all your problems, but there are people who can help guide you on a path towards solving those problems.
Yeah.
And that's so great that this exists. And Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Rob, thanks again for inviting me to your show. Ben, it's great to see you again. You guys are doing great work. Thanks for making people more aware of FirstLink.
Well, it's again, the numbers are 211 or 988. And if somebody can't remember which is which, does it matter which one they call or text?
It does not matter. No wrong phone number to call. Just call either one, whichever one is more comfortable.
All right. Well, Jennifer, thanks again so much.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Well, Ben, I got to say that was an illuminating interview with Jennifer Illich from FirstLink, and a lot of numbers there that I think the general public doesn't understand. And let's be honest, even at $1.8 million, they went from $100,000 to $1.8 million in funding from the legislature, and understanding that their funding is from a lot of different sources, but
federal, state, yes,
$1.8 million is chicken feed. I realize $1 million there, $1 million there. Pretty soon we're talking about real money. It's not that much money in the context of our overall budget. And the impact they were having, and even just 100, because you remember the number she shared with us, that was under the old funding.
Yes.
The impact that they were having is dramatic. So to have a resource like this, and to have potentially saved 128 lives in 2022 alone, and we don't know. I mean, I don't want to subscribe to the fallacy of the predetermined outcome. Just because somebody has an intervention doesn't mean that they were going to commit suicide. But potentially you saved their life. They were in a crisis and they got help 128 times. And gosh, I think if that's worth the money.
And that's worth the money on top of the others. And it's so hard in an audio format like this when I'm a stats guy, clearly, and I throw a lot of numbers around. I know I do it on this podcast too. And I do question myself, because I'm like, how much fun is that to listen to Ben having, or how truly enlightening is it to listen to say Ben, to have Ben go like, it was 10%, now it's 35%. Oh, this went from 57% to 45%.
We can run down some of those numbers. 85,681 contacts in 2022. That's 234 a day. 19,471 of those contacts were about suicide. That's 53 a day. That's 53 people who are considering suicide who called and got help.
And here's the part of this that I find...
A day, 53 people a day.
And here's a part of this story of Jennifer's experience that I find, and FirstLink's experience that I find inspiring, which is she went to a legislature that didn't necessarily know everything about this. And when I say that, I'm truly not trying to insult anyone. And it's not a partisan comment either, because I've been in that chair briefly. You simply can't know everything that the state funds, impacts. You can't be an expert. And if you spent your entire life in, take your pick of industry, in egg commodity sales, you're not going to know what an emergency suicide hotlines of workers like.
And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to know everything. Even if you're an elected official, you don't have to know everything. The only bad thing you can do is refusing to learn. Right.
But someone like Jennifer being willing to go out there, speak to them and speak to this need, because there's an endless list. And I think, and understandably, there's a conservative mindset fiscally conservative mindset that says there's an endless list of good causes we could be giving public money to. What makes yours any different? But there are ones that make certain ones either more urgent or add context. Something that I think Jennifer probably correctly kind of avoided in our conversation was previously FirstLink, based in Fargo, was getting the majority on their state level funding from the Minnesota side, as she alluded to. But that was causing some tension, I think, from the Minnesotans saying, and rightfully so, if you're a Minnesota state government, you're looking at funding going to something that services 3/4 North Dakotans. You're kind of wondering, well, can the North Dakotans pay for this too? Of course we want to help. Yeah. Of course, it's the good cause.
I don't know all the political history.
But this is a positive thing because North Dakota stepped up, and the legislators stepped up with a real amount of funding that's going to make it.
And that's important. I mean, we've spent a lot of time bashing this last legislature for good reason, for spending a lot of time on stupid, frivolous things like book bans, like pronouns, all the other crap that they did. They got this one right. This was right. And I hope that they're open to as they expand. Because again, from a fiscally conservative perspective, okay, we just enabled FirstLink to be able to start working with as she was describing, start working with 911 operators to take some of the burden off law enforcement, right? So that cops don't have to show up every time there's one of these calls. I understand why 911 is sending the police out. That's the tool they have. They're doing the best they can. They're not equipped to do the sort of things that FirstLink does. FirstLink can take that off. FirstLink can take a lot of burden off law enforcement. That saves money. That saves time. That allows us to focus law enforcement on some of the other, rising. We have some rising crime in our state. So at this time, we could shift some of the suicide issues over to people who are well qualified to handle it, and free up law enforcement to maybe address some of these other needs in our criminal justice system.
And it helps recruiting and retention as a workforce issue in regards to both our law enforcement and other medical service providers, because law enforcement has a huge workforce problem right now. And it's the same one that most people are experiencing. It's the gray out problem. The long-term staff is aging out. They're not finding new workers.
So, I mean, you know this because you were a lawmaker. I talk with lawmakers all the time. And I think because they're stuck making decisions. There's all sorts of good ideas. And if they had a bottomless pit of money, they could just fund them all, but they don't. North Dakotans are only going to pay so many taxes. There's only so much money to spend. So they have to make choices. So. And that's just how it works. They have to make choices. The bang for the buck that you're getting from, I think that's what they end up looking at, right? They always say, looking for bang for the buck. The most good with the least amount of resources. That's kind of what they're trying to do. Boy, FirstLink's a place where you're gonna have a lot of impact with a relatively small amount of money.
And this is an achievement on the behalf of the legislature. And I'm trying to remember the phrase, but it's something about like what you prioritize is what, something about like budgetary prioritization. I do hope more legislators use the bully pulpit of elected office to emphasize services like these for their constituents. And I'm not talking about like re-election or whatever. I'm just saying just to make, that much more awareness for those constituents themselves. They're all part of this too, and they can help have that positive impact for the state.
Yeah. Let's move on. I want to talk about something completely unrelated, and it kind of makes me laugh. And it's I started writing a column about this. I don't know if the column will be published by the time this podcast published, but I'll be writing about this as well. But I always wonder, because a lot of my job is writing about hypocrisy in politics, right? Political figures say one thing, they do another thing. And I'll admit, there's a part of me, Ben, that has begun to wonder how much that matters as we live in sort of post-shame America where nobody seems to care.
Given the results of elections, it clearly matters, not a wink, but
nobody seems to care.
When it comes to the electoral process, but
it doesn't matter. I'm team Democrat. I'm always going to vote for the Democrat, and it doesn't matter if they're being hypocritical. I'm team Republican or I'm team Trump, and it doesn't matter what they do. I'm just on that team, and I'm not leaving. That's where a lot of Americans are, and it's killing our country. But this is, I think it's still important to talk about, because I think eventually this stuff's going to start mattering again. And so I had to absolutely laugh out loud. So this week there was a press conference about some money from the infrastructure bill. The full actual title was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Senator Kevin Cramer was one of 19 Republicans in the United States Senate to vote for it. He hosted a press conference, hosted a press conference with some rural communications co-ops, and it was related to some of the broadband infrastructure funding that was in the bill. I think it was like 100 well, here I have the numbers somewhere here.
And I assume Aaron Oban with USDA now is probably there for this, because that's something they emphasize pretty heavily, right?
Yeah. So
I actually haven't seen the press release. I'm actually
they got like 180 some $1 million. And I think it makes a lot of sense in a state like ours. Like, for instance, you look at our road system, right? If North Dakotans had to pay for all of the roads that are in our state, we couldn't afford it. But it makes sense for the nation to subsidize roads in North Dakota, because we're transporting a lot of products, crops, that feed the rest of the country and that contribute to the national economy, right? So
and every state has commodities they're supplying and helping do business with the rest of the country.
Having a road infrastructure, even in places where the tax base doesn't necessarily support that road infrastructure, the national tax base does, and it behooves our nation as a whole for farmers in North Dakota to be able to get their crops to market. That's just reality. And I think infrastructure works the same way. Particularly as we're moving into some new models for working, if we can make American businesses have a more flexible labor force, because wherever you live, you have good internet, that's a boon to our economy. So I believe in this infrastructure stuff. Senator Kevin Cramer made the argument for it. He said that the Infrastructure Investment Act will provide over $2 billion in North Dakota for roads, bridges, rail, broadband, carbon capture, orphan well cleanup. I'm reading those from his press release. That's good stuff. And the thing is, like a giant bill like that, you and I could sit down and go through and find a lot of things in it we don't like. But whatever. That's what compromise is. You get some of what you want. The other side gets some of what they want. We all move on with our lives. The reason I'm bringing all this up in the context of hypocrisy is that one of the organizations that got broadband funding is Beck Communications. And if you're familiar with North Dakota politics, you know that Beck Communications has been hosting a lot of very, very Trumpy, right-wing populist programming. Former state representative Rick Becker had a show. Now, when I was writing my column, apparently he doesn't do that show anymore, or he's not on it, or he doesn't host it anymore, I should say.
All right.
I don't know. I can't say that I pay enough attention to this to really care. But Lori Hines, who is a NDGOP National Committee woman, she's a right-wing, book ban, hate the gays activist. She was Becker's co-host on his show. She hosts the show. She moderated this press announcement of all this broadband money coming from a Biden administration initiative, and I think that is absolutely hilarious. That not only does this rural communications cooperative get $21 million from the Biden administration, while broadcasting almost exclusively political commentary that is all about how evil Joe Biden is. They had Tommy Collins on with the show for a while. During the last election here in the state, she had a hotline for election fraud here in North Dakota. She's a 2020 election denier. Total Fruit Loop. I mean, you look at up and down the programming, it's all right-wing people who don't like Biden. And yet here they are. Here's Lori Hines moderating, not just broadcasting her show on Beck Communications, but literally moderating or emceeing the press conference at which federal subsidies, let's be honest about what they are, federal subsidies from the Biden administration are announced alongside a Biden administration official. I can't help but laugh about it.
Rob, just because of her background doesn't mean that Lori doesn't now understand that Bidenomics works, and that's my assumption and takeaway from this. And I'll take no further questions at this time.
Well, okay. I don't necessarily. I mean, we can get into a broader argument about Biden economics. I'm talking specifically about this one bill.
Yeah, I've certainly enjoyed, and I've talked to you a little bit about this too. That right now, as a Democrat coming from a red state, I genuinely enjoy that Joe Biden himself has gone to House districts of Republican House members who voted against this bill and have put out press releases celebrating the things that bill has provided funding for and calling that out. Because and what I really enjoy about that is I feel that the DNC has ceased to be a 50-state party for some time. They're basically they have been a 17-state party that kind of really comes alive during presidential election years. And what I enjoy about that is the idea that finally, a Democratic president is going into a red district and saying, "Listen, I, by my philosophy, am fighting for you via this infrastructure bill that funds this, XYZ program." Do residents there like it or not? I don't know, but I am so thankful that someone's making a case and standing by their convictions to do it. I'm also glad that administration officials are coming out and talking about what they are doing and the positive effects they think it's having. Well, feel free to disagree with that, but in Lori, I actually want to make a distinction here. I'm not talking about Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer helped craft this bill and voted for it. He is entirely exempt from what I'm talking about.
You're making this a lot more complicated than it needs to be. If you voted against the bill, you don't have any business showing up for the ribbon cutting. That's it.
It makes very, very little sense.
Right. Right. And listen, I understand these bills are complicated. Sometimes I understand that somebody makes the calculation. There's a lot of stuff in the bill I don't like, but there's too much. There's a lot of stuff in the bill I do like. There's too much that I don't like, so I had to vote against it. I can understand. That's a real calculation that people made. But if you voted against the bill,
federal bills are big and multifaceted.
If you voted against the bill, you can't show up against. And also, if you're fashioning yourself as a capital T, capital C, true conservative, and you're out to throw out all the rhinos, and you want to get rid of all the moderates, and you want to go to Washington, and you don't want to compromise with anybody, and you just want to push a conservative, austere agenda, and that's it, and you don't want to ever compromise with Democrats, then you shouldn't be emceeing an event at a bill that was the result of a compromise between Democrats and Republicans, championed by a Democratic president, subsidizing the station that you're broadcasting your conservative views on. Like, you can't, that is an astounding amount of hypocrisy.
And I wonder, when is that going to become reflected in election results? Now, here, to be fair, Lori's not on a ballot. No. She is an RNC. She is an RNC.
She's on the ballot. She's on the ballot within the party in that she's elected to her committee position. But
I could even see
she doesn't hold public office.
A conservative Congress member saying, I vote against the bill because I disagree with 70% of it, but this 30% that I liked, I am celebrating, and I want people to know this. But most of the congressional districts that the president's visiting, for instance, they use the kind of language that is so broad and lacking in nuance that certainly both sides engage in now.
If you voted against the bill and you want to say, then tweet out like, "Hey, I didn't vote for this bill, but I am happy that this is happening." Right, you can make that argument, and I think that's a fair argument to make. But you don't get to posture yourself as the Biden administration's evil and everything they do is awful, and all this stuff, and big government is coming for us, and all this other stuff, and then accept federal subsidies. And you can't, as Beck Communications, make the decision to put the sort of Fruit Loops that they're putting on television locally. And by the way, everybody listening to this is probably scratching their heads, wondering, what is he talking about? This stuff. I don't think many people are watching this stuff, but it does exist.
I'll be terribly honest, I didn't really know about it until you've mentioned it.
It does exist, and Beck Communications is promoting it, and they're also taking subsidies from the Biden administration, and that is hilarious. That is hilarious. I don't blame them for taking the money. It's good money. We're investing in our digital infrastructure. We live in a digital world. That's a good thing. I'm glad it's happening. But if you're Beck Communications, you're being a hypocrite, because you look at their programming, I think Joel Heitkamp actually had a show on it for a little while. But he was kind of like the token liberal. I don't think he does it anymore. On their website, he was under their no longer operating shows. So, and maybe he also realized nobody was watching. But
that's new to me too. And I'm in the Fargo market where Joel's I guess I truly, not that Ben Hansen knowing about you makes anything legitimate, but I consume far too much North Dakota political media to.
Yeah. Obviously not as much as I do. I don't know.
Clearly not.
It would be easy. It would be easy to miss, but I had to laugh out loud. Anyway, I'm writing about that. That column should be out, but I think it's an astounding amount of hypocrisy to do that sort of thing. But again, it doesn't matter. I think a lot of people listening to this show, whatever. Because that's what everybody does. Like, yeah, I'm a Christian and I want to promote Christian views, but I'm going to support Donald Trump, despite the fact that he's a serial adulterer and generally a terrible
but I'm not
being.
entirely cynical that this won't key off some kind of conversation where, again, in a sharper, election, re-election, a lot of most congressional districts at this point are incredibly safe, and it's getting to the point where Senate seats are almost entirely safe for one party or another.
That's what's emboldening this sort of behavior, though. I mean,
and I'd like to see, could this shake the tree loose, even if there's a rural, if I think one of the places that Joe Biden visited was a rural Kentucky congressional district. I'm guessing they're not going to turn around and elect a Democrat, nor am I saying that the solution to everything is that every Republican gets unseated and every seat's held by a Democrat. That's not. What I am saying is maybe that district gets the kind of candidate that comes out and says, you're conservative, I'm conservative, I feel like I should represent you because I'm conservative, but here are things where I think the federal government has a place, and here's where I'd like to work with any administration about it. Let's talk about this and have an intelligent conversation about infrastructure in this country. Is that idealism? Maybe, but if we don't strive towards idealism, we're never going to get there.
Well, yeah, I agree, but I think a lot of what's driving these politicians to sort of indulge themselves in their hypocrisy is that they have nothing to fear. They're not afraid of losing elections right now. And here in North Dakota, if you're a Republican, particularly in Western North Dakota, you don't have anything to fear. The only thing you have to fear is maybe being defeated by another Republican in the primary process. But once you're on the ballot as a Republican in the general election, you're going to win in most of the state.
Yeah. And if you're a House member representing downtown Seattle, the main thing you have to worry about is how, during the Trump years, how loud are you yelling about impeaching President Trump? And if you're not yelling loud enough, you're going to get primaried. You can't talk about something that's actually going to impact the lives of someone not that impeaching the president doesn't impact everybody, but talk about something that's specific to Seattle or specific to a large urban center. And it's just deadening our politics. It's deadening our public policy process in a way that's just awful for the country. And how does someone like a Kelly Armstrong or his Democratic equivalent feel whenever they hop on basically any national radio show and the first question is, Marjorie Taylor Greene said,
Lauren Boebert said, or what do you think
AOC
about the latest,
said,
or what do you think about the latest criminal indictment of Donald Trump was?
Yeah, and what do you have to think about? And he has to get through 8 of those questions before he gets to, so this thing's happening in Western North Dakota, or this,
The problem is, as someone who asks people like that a lot of those questions, it's hard to ignore them. Like, how do you ignore the sort of behavior that's coming out of Washington, D.C.? It is so. I sometimes worry that we're at risk, which is why I'm still writing. I let off this segment talking about whether or not it's even worth it to still talk about hypocrisy. And the reason I still talk about it is because it still matters. When people don't have the courage of their convictions, it matters, especially people who hold elected office. It matters. When they're hypocrites in office, it matters. When they act in ways that are corrupt or unethical or immoral while they're in office, it still matters. For whatever reason, the electorate doesn't seem to care. The electorate's so consumed with partisan tribalism that they don't care about this stuff right now. But I'm telling you, history has a long timeline. Eventually, it's going to matter again. I'm still going to write about it. I'm going to still talk about it. Maybe it won't change anybody's mind today. I still think it matters.
And what are the ill effects of existing in a bubble, one that maybe you didn't choose to create? If you're in Congress right now and you went there with the best of intentions, right now, DC is an automatic bubble. I mean, even being in the Capitol in Bismarck, that's a bubble because you're surrounded by other elected officials and not people who are going to deal with the laws that you pass, but aren't elected to office to deal with them. And that's not inherently an evil thing, but it takes a very specific kind of mind that can reach outside of the immediate place they are to consider those things. And when you get into an area where you're more worried about a primary than a general election, and when you're more worried about national headlines than what your hometown paper is saying, you're getting further and further and further away from that. It's not good. And I actually do think it is worth soldiering on and pointing out where these things are hypocritical, because like you said, eventually something has to turn. There's going to be a spark point where, the tinder is going to get dry enough that a spark is going to start a fire in a positive way. It sounds more destructive than that.
Yeah, boy, what a terrible metaphor. No, not a destructive. A new leaf of it's gonna grow and emerge from the smoldering.
Try and be poetic.
The smoldering dumpster fire. Yeah, leave the literary stylings to the writer over here.
Okay.
All right. What else do we want to hit on? There was so much that happened while I was on vacation. You know how hard it was for me not to work while I was on vacation? I wanted to write so much. Doug Burgum qualified for the debate stage. I think it's fair to say. You know, I wrote yesterday. I think it's worth noting now that it's happened how necessary the cash card giveaway was, because I went through. He filed an FEC report on June. It covered He filed it like in July 14th, I think. But it covered donations from his June 7th campaign announcement through June 30th, which was the end of the reporting period. And he had, and it's hard to say, just in itemized donations, he had probably less than 2,000 itemized donations to his campaign.
Let's set the stage really quick. The RNC said in order to qualify for this debate in August, you had to hit more than 1% in 3 national polls, or hit more than 1% in 2 national polls, and then two in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Right.
And then, but on top of that, you had to get 40,000 unique individual donations, and 200 of which have to be from all 50 states, which in their minds, I'm sure, seemed like a stringent way of weeding out, separating the wheat from the chaff in their minds. And so you're setting the stage for the fact that Doug Burgum was at.
Well, he was, So he was at, on June 30th, he had fewer than 2,175. Now, it's a little hard to tell because just based on this FEC report, there's $184,000 donations and small dollar donations that aren't itemized. Now, theoretically, that could represent $185,001 donations. Now, it doesn't, we know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that on June...
Even if it did, that counts. But...
Right, that counts. What I'm trying to say, though, is on June 30th, he was very, very far away.
He was under 3K when he needed more than 40K.
Right.
I mean, it was night and day. There was not like, we were at 25,000 and we're trying to rev the engine up. Frankly, in the race for donors, he was dead in the water.
Right. So on June 30th, he was well short, which is the end of the FEC reporting period. He was well, tens of thousands of donations short of the 40,000 he needed. On July 10th, 10 days later, he started selling cash cards, and by July 19th, his campaign said that he hit the fundraising threshold. And now the only thing that was left was to hit the polling threshold. He did that yesterday with a morning consult poll that came out. And now he's qualified for the debate stage, one of 7 currently, although it's an open question about whether or not Donald Trump's going to participate. Although I think he will. That guy can't avoid.
So you had, you still have the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, the immediate previous Vice President, has not qualified for this debate, and Doug Burgum has.
Right. Well, Doug Burgum actually outraised Mike Pence according to that. And according to that
just barely, but he did.
Report, but
the governor of North Dakota,
and not
the
just
vice president,
and by the way, that's taking out the money that Doug Burgum loaned his own campaign. According to that FEC report, he's loaned his campaign over $10 million so far. If we take that out and just count contributions from people not named Doug Burgum, he beat Mike Pence. Yeah. And I just saw another poll in Iowa pop this morning. He's at 3%. He's up to 6% in New Hampshire. If those trends continue, and suddenly now, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people are kind of being naysayers about Doug Burgum, and again,
but it goes to show that that's how difficult it is to raise that 40K or to get 40K unique individuals, and that's why Doug Burgum did this giveaway. I mean, he did essentially just pay to get his way onto the stage there, because Vivek Ramaswamy is qualified, right?
Who? What'd you say? I didn't get
Vivek. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Ramaswamy. Yes. Yeah. He's qualified as well.
He's qualified too, but the former governor of Arkansas, multiple term governor of Arkansas,
Asa Hutchinson is
larger larger state population than North Dakota. Mike Pence was a congressman and a governor from the state of Indiana, which features an urban base like Indianapolis, and he has still not gotten to this place. So that shows you how much Doug Burgum had to, if you said uncharitably, had to artificially inflate his support, kind of astroturf it, if you will, in order to get onto that debate stage. I don't know what that says in the long term. I know what the campaign wants to hear is, well, on to the next stage. And that will be what most people think, because you've indicated, I think you're very correct, and most have, that debate stage is really going to be for a lot of folks the first time they ever see Doug Burgum on a stage. Here's Ben's probably inaccurate prediction for it is, I don't think there's any way Donald Trump shows up unless there's a crisis where he needs to, because Donald Trump is a coward that avoids in-person conflict if he can, and he will have a rally at the same time on some kooky media outlet where he'll be saying outrageous things, and the headline will be candidates debate whatever. Chris Christie throws some punches, but Trump said blank, and it'll be some outrageous thing that will grab headlines for 24 hours, and the debate will disappear.
I think we're actually better served. I think the public's better served if Trump's not there, because he's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room. I really want Americans to see these Trump alternatives and hopefully support them. And the calculation Trump would make in not showing up for the debate will be the first one. It's the same one that like John Hoeven makes when he doesn't choose to debate. Like every election cycle, someone like John Hoeven's on the statewide ballot, and the Democratic challenger wants to do 25 debates, and Hoeven agrees to like 2. And the reason why is Hoeven doesn't have any reason to engage.
Why would you open yourself up? Why would you drag yourself down?
You're just opening up potentials. Like you really have nothing to win because you're the dominant. You're leading in all the polls. You potentially have a lot if you screw up or some viral moment happens. You have a lot to lose, and I think. But
and Trump has been actually almost not weirdly actually. It's kind of characteristic for him. He'll be open about the game of politics, and he has said openly, "Why would I go? I'm number one right now. I'm everyone's number one choice." And if Trump's your guy and he's your number one choice, and you hear him say, I'm not going to mess with these other guys, I'm your clear candidate, I think his supporters simply say, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
you are,
I don't think
in
he's
our eyes,
hurt.
The legitimate president. Why would we go for somebody else?
He probably doesn't hurt himself. I think that the thing about him not being there is it maybe allows the not Trump candidates to consolidate, because I think the debate's going to weed some of them out. As for Burgum, I think, and this will be the last point we make, I think Burgum has to have a moment at the debate, because there's going to be quite a few people who watch the debate live and watch the whole thing. There's going to be many, 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 many more people who are informed about the debate through short clips that get posted on social media, through memes, through things like that. And the only way to connect to them through that medium is to have a moment, to have some sort of a memorable exchange with a moderator or with somebody else on the stage that can catch people's attention. He's got to have a moment. Now, I don't know how. I don't know what that is. But
I'll say it again. It's got to be a gasp moment in his introduction. He can't come out with small town dad jokes. Here's my bio, because he will get engulfed. What I see is Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie having an alpha male contest. Chris Christie trashing the president. Ron DeSantis doing the weird thing Ron DeSantis does, which is, I'm every one of Trump's policies, but even more, but don't choose Trump, which makes no sense. And then I think Tim Scott and Doug Burgum sit on the sidelines saying, I'm seeing a lot of fighting here, and what we need more today is consensus. And if they do that, no one will even remember.
He's going to become a rounding error he's going to remain the rounding error that he already is in national polling. And you're right. I do, by the way, I think that is why Ron DeSantis is fading in the polls, is he's offering voters Trump when they already have Trump.
And his campaigns ran very sloppily.
And that too.
The money's not being well spent.
And he doesn't have.
Is not honed. He is not disciplined. He is not trained. You can tell he does not listen to a speechwriter trying to hone his message. He's all over the place.
I would argue that he probably listens to a speechwriter too much. I mean, the other thing he's lacking. I mean, he's trying to offer people Trump when he's not Trump, and he also doesn't have Trump's charisma. Because whatever else you want to say about Trump, the man is. He's an entertainer.
Well, and Trump can respond in real time to a crowd for whatever reason. DeSantis can't. I actually strongly disagree that he's listening to a speechwriter. If he is, he's listening to 8 speechwriters and doing it by committee. If he was listening to one speechwriter, he'd at least be a type of bad candidate. Ron DeSantis is currently 8 kinds of a bad candidate.
At some point, I mean, speechwriters can only do so much. I mean, at some point, it's got to be the candidate. And it's got to be stuff that the candidate does that wins the election. And Ron DeSantis, you know, he knows how to shovel, you know, culture war, red meat politically, you know, in terms of policy. But he can't be, that's not going to be enough for him, because Donald Trump would do all that stuff too. Donald Trump will pander to all the book banners and all that stuff too. You know, what does Ron DeSantis have to offer beyond that? You know, he doesn't, he's not entertaining the way Trump is.
Yeah. What's the date on that debate?
I don't know. It's in August. Asked me a question.
But yeah. So we'll leave it off at that. It is interesting that Doug Burgum's up to 6% in New Hampshire. Clearly, that large amount of spend he's doing in those states is having an impact. And mathematically, if he was to keep going up exponentially at this rate, he'd be in a great spot. That's not how polls work.
No,
nor is that what
when we get to the point where Iowa's voting and New Hampshire's voting, because I think even if Burgum bombs at the debate, or even if he's just a non-factor at the debate, I think he'll continue at least through Iowa and New Hampshire.
Why wouldn't you?
But you know, if he can get some momentum and he places like 3rd in Iowa convincingly, he places 2nd or 3rd or something in New Hampshire, it's anybody's race, you know. And again, because we don't know. I mean, as formidable as Trump looks, we don't know if he's going to be done in by legal problems at some point. Ron DeSantis is already fading. At that point, it's anybody's game. But I've made that point before. We're going to end the show there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, FirstLink is a resource for you. If you're struggling and you need help, if it's just, I don't know how to make ends meet this month, I can't get out of bed, I can't control my emotions right now, I need someone to talk to, I need to know how to find help, call them, 211-988. You can call, you can text, doesn't matter which one. If you need help, use them. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.